In my previous video on the different stages of Final Fantasy XIV, I talked about the worst part of the modern game, the Seventh Astral Slog. But before we get to Heavensward, there is one patch left that I believe deserves its own video, and that is patch 2.5 Before the Fall. A Realm Reborn was good, and the Seventh Astral Slog was god-awful. But it's in patch 2.5 that the game rose to a whole new level as we were guided in and given the setup for Heavensward. Patch 2.5 truly is Final Fantasy XIV's gateway into greatness. But before we get into the video, know that this video will be focused on the MSQ and its effects on the story and how it changes things, and why it is great from a storytelling standpoint. So if you have yet to play through the patch, I'd recommend doing so, but for those of you who have, or simply don't care about spoilers, let's talk about Before the Fall. Final Fantasy XIV patch 2.5 Before the Fall hit on January 20th of 2015, and added a few things like the Final Crystal Tower Alliance raid and a new trial, but what was really important here was the main story quest. The MSQ in patch 2.5 and 2.55, which I'll be treating as the same thing for the sake of brevity, set up the basic plot for the Heavensward expansion, and a lot goes down in this patch to get the Scions on the path to Ishgard. So to start off the story of patch 2.5, there's a large concern about corruption in the Crystal Braves, which is Alphinaud's private army. Basically, their weapons kept getting stolen, and you take out some black market people to stop all of that at the very beginning. Next up, an Ishgardian knight named Lucia shows up and tells you that she thinks the Keeper of the Lake, who was mentioned in the last patch, is awake, and tells you to go investigate it. This is when you access what is one of my favorite dungeons in the whole game, aptly called Keeper of the Lake. The dungeon is a giant spire coming out of the lake in Mordona with a dragon wrapped around it, and as you climb the spire to get to the final boss, you get to kill a bunch of dragons, which is always cool. The final boss of the dungeon is the father of the first brood himself, Midgarsimer. You fight him, and once he's defeated, he recognizes you as one of Hydaelyn's chosen and tells you that you should view things with unbiased eyes. And then he proceeds to put out the light of all the crystals you spent most of 2.0 collecting and takes the blessing of light away from the player. Stupid dragon. Although, he then forms a pact to come along with the Warrior of Light, and you get a really cool minion out of it, so there is an upside. This really is the coolest part of 2.5, as it introduces us to Midgarsimer, who is very important going forward into Heavensward. And the way that things are cryptically set up, and the way everything that canonically makes you powerful and what makes you legendary is taken away, actually made me feel like the stakes were being raised, and that important characters could actually be killed off for the first time in the story. This is in stark contrast to 2.0, where everything worked out no matter what happened and everyone lived. Games with high stakes stories like the one in FF14 are at their best when the characters you care for are at risk, and this is where it truly starts in 14. Speaking of raised stakes, an Asien then finds out that you have lost the Blessing of Light and attacks the Rising Stones, actually accomplishing something this time. While the Asien fails to steal the staff that it wants to steal to bring about the rejoining, he kills the Scion Moonbreeda. Yes, it took all 5 minutes for someone to be killed after losing the blessing, and then proceeds to kidnap Minfilia. To get Minfilia back, you go into a really cool trial called the Crystallis or something, and defeat the Asien, who afterward bragged he could not be killed. But with her dying strength, Moonbreeda creates a Blade of Light, and for the first time ever, the Warrior of Light actually permanently kills an Asien, which is a huge turning point for the overarching narrative. This is possibly the biggest turning point throughout the entire game, really. Up to this point in the story, the Asiens were a mystery. They were an immortal force that the Scions were trying to find a way to overcome, and in this moment they finally triumph over one and can now actually fight the Asiens and actually make progress in beating them back. In the middle of what was essentially Moonbreeda's funeral, it is revealed that the dragons have started attacking Ishgard, which is a serious oh shit moment. You try to get the Grand Companies to help, but your pleas fall on deaf ears per normal, and you end up going along with Alphinaud's private army to Kurthus to fight the dragon alongside the Ishgardians. That is until Lady Iceheart shows up and nukes one of the protective barriers and allows a giant-ass dragon to rush the city, resulting in the second best trial in the entire game, the Steps of Faith, only beaten by the final Steps of Faith in 3.x patches. In this game, fighting dragons on a bridge just works amazingly, I have to say. You repel the dragons, but like half of Ishgard's forces are dead by the end of it, so that's a problem that is especially apparent moving forward. When you eventually return to the Rising Stones, you get a small period of calm as you were tasked with following the Lalafell around and watch them fail in life, just like everyone in real life who plays a Lalafell. Then you were tasked with helping out a scholar in an investigation around the Black Shroud. where things pick back up as you discover the corpse of a character that we had interacted with a fair bit during the 2.x patches, a man from the Crystal Braves named Wildred. After more investigations into the matter, it is revealed that the 1st and 3rd divisions of the Crystal Braves have been bought off by Teleji Adeleji, and that Wildred had grown smart to it and had started asking questions when he really shouldn't have. Well, of course, this is already bad. Everything really goes to shit when you were invited to a feast held by the Sultana in Ul'Dah, where she reveals that she plans to completely demolish the social structure of Ul'Dah by getting rid of the Sultanate and the Syndicate, the 2 ruling powers in Ul'Dah. If this wasn't already a shocking moment for the world's politics, as she starts drinking her wine in a toast, she collapses as it has been poisoned. Teleji Adeleji then conveniently comes in and declares that the player is guilty of regicide, because of course he does. Now then, let's recap. Everything has effectively gone to shit in about 20 minutes of playtime. First, the Sultana wants to completely remake the powers that be in Ul'Dah, then she gets poisoned, and then the world's #1 hero is declared guilty of regicide. This is not a good day for Eorzean politics. This is only with the hero, though. The other Scions are also finding themselves in trouble. Alphinaud has been lured out by the Crystal Brave's second-in-command, who then holds a knife to the small Elzen's throat, and as Thancred is relaxing, he sees an uprising suddenly start up in the streets thanks to the Brass Blades, the Syndicate's private army. Everyone in this game seems to have their own damn private army. These few sections finally pick up the plot threads that have been strewn about all over the 2.x patches, and finally bring them to fruition. If you watched my last video, I repeatedly mentioned how they mishandled various plot threads by lazily throwing them about, but this is when they finally become interesting and worthy of thought. Teleji Adeleji finally makes his move and Alphinaud's private army ends up serving the exact opposite of their planned purpose. In this moment, everything really is flipped onto its head in a very natural and believable way, as by this point you know the characters, the world, and its flaws, and it makes sense without reducing the shock value of the situation. Yet, this is only the beginning, as things continue from here and change things even more drastically than before. Back at the feast hall, the Warrior of Light is brought in, chained up by Ilbrid, the evil Lalafell, then announces that all of the Scions of the Seventh Dawn are under arrest for conspiracy, regicide, and a myriad of other crimes. General Raubon then gets mad and tells the Walking Potato off, only to be mocked by said Walking Potato, who then reveals to the crowd that the Sultana is dead. Now you see, this is the point where I went, yeah, everyone in the Scions is fucked. Because Raubon is crazy protective and loyal to the Sultana, and also happens to be the single most badass character in the game. So I was expecting a bloody rampage of him killing every Scion in his blind rage. Yet, for a time he just sits there and allows Teleji to basically say that the Scions use dark magic to make friends with all the grand companies and that Thancred has been actively helping the Guardians. A nice nod to a plot point from 2.0, though horribly out of context. The other Grand Company leaders are escorted out, and this is when Raubon finally snaps. He charges Teleji, leading to the most glorious death a T-rated game can allow. Another Lalafell with too much power then gets mad, stating that the murder is illegal, so Raubon sensibly tries to kill him as well, because no one tells him what to do. At that moment, Ilberd, the Crystal Brave's second-in-command, chops off one of Raubon's arms, before lecturing him on how he has become a horrible person, never mind all of the shit that he himself has done. Despite the fact that he just had his arm chopped off, Raubon tells the Scions to run and that he'll cover their escape. Luckily, this means that he didn't kill any of the Scions, so the Scions run, but one by one the group is ambushed and a character from the Scions stays behind to play hero, something that from here on out happens almost constantly whenever anything goes wrong in the rest of the game. Eventually, it's down to just the player and Minfilia, who then says that Hydaelyn has spoken to her and wants her to stay behind as well, leaving just you to escape from the tunnel where you find Alphinaud and Tataru, the Lalafell who we followed earlier, waiting for the Scions. But you're all that's left at this point. You quickly flee the area in the same cart that you woke up in during the very beginning cutscene of ARR, which was especially fitting for my character having been carted into Ul'Dah and now running the hell away from Ul'Dah in the same cart. To me, this truly is the death of the Scions of the Seventh Dawn, because after this, things are never entirely the same for the group. They have lost everything at this point in the story. Their reputation is ruined thanks to being blamed for regicide along with other propaganda. Their members have all gone missing except for 3, and you're the only one that isn't either a strategist or a receptionist. Their allies have either run off or been killed, and the fate of Raubon is uncertain as they left him behind. This patch provides the game with a blank slate that was needed for the story to improve and go where it wants, and for the game itself to finally wash the blood of 1.0 off its hands for good. There aren't many story-based games that can make you unable to figure out what will happen next at the 70 to 100 hour mark, yet it is here in the story that, for me, was about 120 hours in, that it accomplishes exactly that, and it still manages to prevent itself from feeling forced or rushed, and that's truly commendable and something very hard to do in writing. It is here that Heavensward truly begins, as the remaining heroes can't return home to the Rising Stones, thanks to it being completely controlled by the Crystal Braves. Trust me, I tried to go back. The guard at the front door conveniently was on our side but wouldn't allow me in. Everything has truly gone to shit for the Scions, as they are now wanted fugitives, and any allies they had are gone or may as well have been gone, except for one, House Fort Thames from Ishgard, a group you constantly helped near the end of ARR and throughout the 7th Astral Slog. Luckily, House Fort Thames welcomes the Scions with open arms and is willing to do all they can to get the group into Ishgard for protection. This is also where Alphinaud finally becomes a good character, as his previously cocky attitude is decimated by the betrayal of the Crystal Braves, and he becomes grounded and remains like that for the rest of the game, luckily. But as he wallows in self-hatred, the player and Tataru confront him, telling him to look heavensward. I see what you did there. Very clever, Yoshida. As cheesy as the final words are, it perfectly sums up the atmosphere by the end of the patch. It's depressing, and the characters along with the player are still processing everything that has happened. They managed to find a place of temporary safety, but how long it will last for is unknown. And if you know the geography of Ul'Dah, they really have no other clear options other than Ishgard. They've just fled from Ul'Dah. Mardona is swarmed by the traitorous Crystal Braves. Whether they would be allowed in Gridania or Limsa is uncertain, and Limsa is the only port city in Ul'Dah. To get through Dravania, you need to pass through Ishgard, and Girabania at this point is swarming with Garleans. They are effectively screwed if Ishgard doesn't let them in, and Alphinaud probably knows it. The remaining Scions are out of options, but luckily stories like this are often at their best when the characters are out of options. And I think it is safe to say that Heavensward is, or at least is very near to Final Fantasy XIV at its best. Patch 2.5 is a fantastic swan song to 2.x and even to 1.x. Everything that is directly tied into the ARR subarc is tied up in 2.5, and we are launched into Heavensward full force. This patch really is when the game finally comes into its own. It is the point in the game's history where a competent team is in charge, they have the budget they need, and most importantly, the time they need. From here on out, the stars were aligned for the FF14 development team, and they haven't looked back since. Hence why I refer to Before the Fall as Final Fantasy XIV's gateway to greatness.
Thou thinkest sanctuary lieth beyond. Delusion, despair, death. Thou shalt find naught else here.